Case Study 2 CPD videos by Lance Doughty. The acquisition of soccer skills is fundamental to enjoyment of the game and is essential to the attainment of expertise. Participants spend most of the time in practice with the intention of improving technical skills. However, it doesn't transfer into matches. Current coaching practice is therefore based on traditional impression techniques rather than theory-based evidence. The aim of this video is to question some views about current practice instructions in soccer. Lastly, compare and contrast different approaches, providing enough literature to support my findings. Provide examples of practice for both approaches. In schools, most PE settings use a constraints-led approach. In this model, constraints are not always limiting or negative factors. They are all the factors that influence learning performance at any moment in time. Constraints can refer to the individual, the environment, and ultimately the task. Here is a diagram of Newell's model explaining the constraints further. A triangle with the constraints in the middle, with the three types of constraints leading to the learning skill. Individual constraints. This could be body size, height and weight, physical attributes, speed, strength, flexibility, mental attributes such as concentration, confidence, emotion control and motivation. Lastly, perceptual decision-making skills, recognizing patterns of play. Next, you have environmental constraints. This could be the temperature, the natural light, weather conditions, and auditory feedback. Task constraints. Rules of the sport, pitch size, goal size, equipment used, and the numbers of opponents on each team. Next, the ecological approach. Brough and Bennett believe that a person's development is affected by everything in their surrounding and environment. This approach helps us understand why we may behave differently when we compare our behaviour in the presence of different environments. Our behaviour when we are, for instance, in the school, in the PE environment, or if we're in a training academy environment. So in this case, training academy versus training at school, what you would have is different style of practice, different drills, different levels of cognitive interference, different levels of contextual interference, environment change, constraint, differentiation, different motor programs, and low-high organization. To infer into practice, one of the most common approaches that we use is the information process approach. Humans process information they receive through sensory input, what we see and what we hear. All information is gathered from the various sensory inputs. It's stored for a split second in the short-term memory before it is processed. It's suggested that the short-term memory can only hold up to some pieces of information that is retained for less than a minute. The long-term memory, which appears to have limitless capacity, contains information relating to past experiences. With this approach into practice, it will be best to do with block practice, which helps us groove in. Block practice is when the learner performs a single skill over and over again, with repetition being the key, marked with lower levels of what is called cognitive interference. So when we repeat the skill into a game, we'll simply rely on memory. The block practice will connect with whole practice skills. Whole practice skills require low in complexity and high in organization. Skill is first demonstrated and then practice as a whole from start to finish. It's best used for fast skills which cannot be easily separated into sub-parts, such as a long ball in football, ground pass, or dribbling. As you can see, the participant is performing the long ball as a whole practice. In the block practice regime, repeating a single skill over and over again, with repetition being key, marked with low levels of cognitive interference. Skill first demonstrated as a whole, from start to finish. Next, the same thing is happening with the ground passing in soccer. Another single skill repeated over and over again. So our information processors will remember this experience, and when we try to transfer this into a game, we'll remember it for a long-term memory. Low in complexity, high organization. As you can see, the movement continue is discrete, because it is really quick. Lastly, dribbling in soccer, a whole practice. Single skill repeatedly done over and over again. Here are a few of the drills. As you can see, the participant getting, is getting used to the movement. By doing this, he's allowing his memory to remember these experiences for him to be able to transfer it into a game. Different types of drills that you could do. Next, moving on to Smith's schema theory. This is the theory states that all knowledge is organized into units. Within these units of knowledge is stored information. A simple idea that was in many sports we hardly ever repeat exactly the same action. Bringing me on to my next control program, Closed Open Controls Loop Theory. This is the output phase of information processing. When we develop a new skill during the cognitive and associative phases of learning, it is transferred into long-term memory. A series of subroutines organized into a correct sequence to perform a movement pattern. Applying the previous theories into practice will do it in the part practice style. Skills in high complexity and low in organization. The parts of the skill are practiced in isolation, which is useful for complicated and serial skills. The transfer of skills from parts to a whole may not be effective, and it may also reduce the kinetic awareness or full feel for the skill. By understanding and feeling how each movement is distinctive, the learner is able to store the movement more effectively within their long-term memory. Next is the progressive part practice. Now, as I said before, parts of the skill are practiced individually in order before being linked together and expanded. For example, heading a ball in football, you have to jump before you head the ball, and the two of them are linked together. Heading soccer part practice. The skill is high and complex, but low in organisation. The parts of the skill is practiced in isolation. As you can see, he's breaking down the skill by simply just throwing the ball and heading it to himself. First part of the skill. Secondly, treated that for somebody throwing him the ball and he's heading it, so he's working on his own movements. Central skills and parts to whole. The jump, crucial part of the header. Part practice will once linking all up together. Again, the volley in soccer. Another skill that's high and complex but low in organisation. Breaking down the skills so you can understand how each movement is distinctive, so the learner or the participant can store the movement more effectively within their long-term memory. Subroutines to the open and closed loop. Breaking it down, then progressing it. Somebody's throwing it, the ball. Finding other approaches. Overall, I think it is good to train in different environments using the different methods because each method is activated on many motor programs. These motor programs help us with the memory of the skill that we lose to help improve the outcome on our performance when we produce different skills of the game. This is about improving our skill level and transferring it into our game, making participants better performance.